Tonight is Monday, March 11th, 2019. This is the regular city council meeting for the city of St. Peter. It is 7 o'clock p.m. We'll call the meeting to order. Would everyone please join in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Everyone should have a copy of the agenda. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? If not, is there a motion for approval?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor of the agenda as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Next, we have the minutes from our February 25th, 2019 meeting. Those minutes appear on pages 4 through 7. Are there any changes or corrections to those minutes? If not, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of the minutes as presented, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Those minutes are approved. Next, we will address visitors. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the council on any agenda item? Seeing no one, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the council on any matter whatsoever? Seeing no one, we will move into the consent agenda. The consent agenda begins in detail on page 8 and concludes with the resolution on page 18 and includes the following license for consumption and display to Nicollet County Ag Society for 400 West Union from April 1st, 2019 to March 31st, 2020, plus the regular schedule of disbursements for February 22nd, 2019 through March 6th, 2019. Are there any questions or comments about the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion for approval?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Now, any questions, comments? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Cohen.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Grahams.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin.
Aye.
Mayor Zimmerman.
Aye. Consent agenda is approved. Next, we have unfinished business, which there is none, so we will move to new business. And the first up is Minnesota Square Park Pavilion Phase 2 Bid Award. Todd?
Mayor, members, I'm here to do the primary discussion, but if you have a very technical question, we might rely on your construction manager, Eric Bartz from R.W. Karlstrom, who's sitting there in the back of the room. The information starts on page 19 within your packet, and it includes a recommendation to accept Phase 2 bids for most of the sections that were bid as a part of Phase 2. I think it's important to note that we had a few of the areas that we did not receive bids on. Most of those were lower valued things like the cement countertop and a few things like that. Which we can continue to pursue. They wouldn't necessarily have to be done through a bid process as they are under the threshold for state bidding and your policy, and so we can pursue those through proposal as we get a little bit closer to the need for that within the body of the document and the contract and the construction phases. Another one that's important there is sodding and correction of the soil after construction has gone on. So those are a couple of the major ones that we didn't receive bids on. Eric provided a letter which starts on page 21 that lists off all of the work scope numbers, 3B, 4A, 6A. You can see the bidders that were there, and the apparent low bidders are listed, are denoted with an asterisk before the dollar sign within that bid amount, so you can see all of those that are in place. I think probably the biggest issue that you want to talk about is, well, where did we end up at? How are we in relation to the budget that was put together? How are things fitting together so far? So even including those areas where we did not receive bids, we have estimates from your construction manager included in these numbers, so that it really gives you, I think, a pretty good picture of where we are at relative to the entire project and relative to the construction budget that was put together. So the total cost of the project, if you accept the Phase 2 bids as recommended, including the estimates in those areas that we did not receive bids, is about $1.677. So $1,677,000.34. This does not include the building permit, but that's estimated at about $16,500. Those numbers include a proposed change order, and you see that change order within the information that's included on page 23 on to 24. and that's under the structural concrete and foundation number. As you may recall, originally when you accepted that bid, it was approximately $106,000. We had a discussion with the contractor related to a change order by moving the timeline back to a spring start construction, which resulted in a $40,000 deduct. So that $40,000 deduct is shown on page 23. So from 106 to $66,375. So I think that's important to remember. This also includes a reduction, a donation to the project from R.W. Carlstrom. So they've reduced their fee in the amount of about $15,854. So that'll be an additional donation to your project from their original contract amount, which was in excess of $42,000. As you recall, when you entered that agreement, it was based on, forgive me for not remembering the exact percentage, but I believe it was 2.75% of the total bids is what we would pay them. Now they've established it at a flat $30,000 rate for you, so that's a gift towards the project. The funding plan for this is similar to what you've seen in the past, but we're able to just articulate it more clearly and where the numbers are. And so as you may recall, we have about $110,000 in donations, $100,000 in general funds that you pledge to match $100,000 of that $110,000 donation number. You have state grant dollars of $196,000. As you recall, you got $200,000, but $4,000 is kept by the state of Minnesota for administration of the grant, and then that would be leaving the amount to be financed of about $1.3 million. Your team met on this for quite a little bit of time last week to discuss the bids, especially those areas where we only received one bid, or it's a little bit higher than what we anticipated as a part of the estimate. Frankly, here's kind of where we ended up. It is a little bit of a crapshoot if you go out for bids again. We don't know. Bids could come in higher or they could be lower, but they could also be higher or lower, just to be clear. The belief is that most of the contractors that we see in our area that specialize in this kind of construction are really, really busy. And that's one of the reasons that you see the bids where they're at. We also believe that based on the size and scope of this project, even though it's $1 million+ project, relatively speaking to some of the other projects that we see going on in our area that consume these contractors' time, energy, and efforts, this is a relatively small project. And the timeline is, well, what the timeline is, and so there's not a lot of wiggle room for some of these folks. And so we believe that accepting these bids is the appropriate course of action for the City Council. I think it's also important to note, as we discuss on page 23 and 24, you'll see where we are relative to the total costs. Right now, we are about $39,000 over, but we still have a little bit of money in contingency, although using this, we are still using some of that contingency up. The site is very well known. The contracts or the bid specs were very well defined, and so we hope that we won't use a whole lot of contingency. It's a pretty well defined project, and so we hope that that carries us through where we need to go. Also included in your packet and up on the screen here is an image of the kind of redesign after the Best Value Committee had done their work. It also shows some of the layout issues and then more of what I would call a stick diagram or schematic of it on the bottom of page 25. The resolution to approve this section of this phase of bidding with the exclusion of 7B, which we're looking at, and Eric is going to do some more work on the EFS portion of this. Maybe there's some additional finishes or something we can change to find some cost savings. This bid is still good for this section till your next council meeting, so you could certainly take it up then, but we're hoping to find a little bit more cost savings through some potential material changes. So on page 26 is the resolution. I will note that we do have one error on the resolution in section item number 1, 22A, so it's near the bottom of that table, near the bottom of that list. We list out plumbing at $3,871. It's actually $13,871. You'll see that reflected in the documents on page 23 and also in Eric's letter on page 21 and 22. So the appropriate number is $13,871.
And I think the
That's
overhead has a change on it already.
Yeah, the overhead has it correct. Let me show that again. Yeah, we have that correct here on the overhead as well.
That shows in the total then.
Yes, it does show in the total, Jerry. So it's It's just that when I put the resolution together, I missed a digit, I missed the one, but the math all adds up appropriately at that 13,871. So the recommendation is to approve the resolution for Phase 2. This does get you going. If you do approve this, we will continue on the process for securing the financing, which will come to you in upcoming meetings. Again, that would be at about $1.3 million. We anticipate, and as we told you before, that should you pursue in that manner, that the payment on that per year is approximately $91,000 per year in debt service. So just so that you're aware, any additional donations that you get between now and then will reduce that cost, or between now and the time of issuance, more accurately, will reduce those costs. And so I know some of you have talked about some additional work in relation to that, but this is where you are today.
But even if donations come in after the issuance, we can still take that and apply it to the
So
principal
that, you bet. Yep,
at some point.
yep.
Okay. Questions for Todd or for Eric? Eric, you want to come up, Eric, just as long as you're here?
I don't want to steal Eric's thunder, but that was
No.
kind of our deal tonight.
Right. If you just want to identify yourself.
Yep, Eric Bartz with RW Carlstrom.
Okay. Ed, you had a question?
How much of the money that do we have left that's just in case?
Oh, okay.
The
Now I get what you're
contingency
saying.
money?
Yep, so that is listed on, I got to get to the right space here. It's on page 24. And so you'll see there's about $40,000 left in contingency.
How much did we start with?
About 160 something, if I remember right, Eric. Maybe you remember it off the top of your head.
Isn't it up
Yep,
here?
155, 806.
There you
So
go.
we've already used a big chunk of that and we haven't even started doing anything yet?
I wouldn't define it as used it. We put it in there, it's to balance us out in the pricing process. There's things that we don't assume we get every detail in the individual line item estimates, so we take that contingency and it floats or it acts as a buffer in the pricing. So we haven't used it, we've reduced it. It used to be 10% of the project cost, and now because we've defined more scope of the project, we've reduced it down to 3% of the project cost.
Any other questions? Steve?
You know, on line 8A, I see that, you know, on the schematic that Mr. Prasky was showing, there's 3 doors, but then under 8A on page 21, it says coiling overhead doors. What does that mean?
So 8A is only there's a sink inside the pavilion, and there's a coiling overhead door to basically close it off from the
Okay,
public.
all right.
And
So it's kind of like the door out in front of the rec department
Right.
here that rolls up and rolls
Yeah,
down.
okay, all right, thank you.
Anyone else? Eric, I have a question for you. The ones that we did only, in your letter, we did only get one bid on some of these. How comfortable are you with those? How, I guess, you know, as far as your estimate, based on your estimates and based on these people that did bid, you know, as far as the value they're providing for the bid?
I'm comfortable with those that bid and the value. Todd kind of spoke to the point of we're in a position with the construction market that availability is a large factor too, and if we could take the time or adjust the schedule more, we could try and go back out and look for more competitive bids, but
But that may change too. I'm just, you know, more curious about the ones where there's only one, I guess, you know. The other ones, you know, there was some pretty good spread on some of these, but most of them were pretty competitive the way it looks. But I know some of the companies that there was only one bid, they're reliable, their integrity is good, and,
Correct.
you know,
Yep.
from that regard. So I was just wondering what your experience was with them and that type.
Yeah. We don't have any concerns about any of the contractor's ability to perform.
Right. Anyone else? Ed?
I really don't know how to word this, but what's the chances of this thing staying on budget? It just looks like, to me, like we're gonna be going over budget.
I feel like we're in a good position right now. I mean, the documents have been finalized, reviewed. Everybody's coming back with contract pricing, so I feel good about it.
You know, just, well, I'm gonna interrupt, just with the hospital, you know, we have the same type of situation there. You know, there's a lot of overruns and there's contingencies, and that's why I guess we hire these guys to give us as much information. There's never a 100% guarantee on all of this stuff, but, you know, we hire good professional people to manage this for us, and I'm hoping that, me too. You know, there's always gonna be some doubt, there's no doubt about that.
One more.
Yeah, go ahead.
And looking at the weather. What are
Thanks,
your,
Ed.
What are your chances of still being on schedule? Because you know what March and April can bring you, and we got guess your best.
Right.
So let me
This is more
articulate.
difficult than the last question you had.
So let me jump in there and Eric can chime in. The discussion at our meeting was that, crap, we really need spring to happen. That would be great. But all these folks bid knowing what the timeline was. And so we'll do our best to hold them to that timeline. That's what we can do. If spring doesn't really spring until June, that'll be a significant issue. It really will be, and then everybody will do their best to try and comply with the timeline that's out there. That is certainly not an issue related to the money. It's related to activities that are going on in the park. We have already worked on contingency plans and other things with some of the other activities that are going on earlier that we knew would be disrupted. Those same kind of contingency plans can be continued through for other activities that would be later in the year. We hope not to have to need that, but we'll be ready to go as best as we can with that. I think it's important for folks to remember that this will not disrupt the entire park. That park is a lot of acreage, and so will not disrupt the entire park. And I think also as we see other events earlier in the year, whether it's Ambassadors Blues Fest or the 4th of July, if we do have problems later in the year, we'll learn from some of that and be able to accommodate that or at least respond to that hopefully better.
We may have to have the 4th of July in October this year. Yeah. We can adjust.
Better let my fireworks company know that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I don't know, Eric, if you have any other commentary.
No, I mean, we're gonna push for the schedule. That's our intent, but in the past 3 or 4 years, we've seen some historic weather patterns that we can only do so much with the weather.
Yeah. You know, the alternative is to not accept bids, and then you punt for the future. If we punt for the future and we bid a month from now or 2 months from now, the weather could be just as bad in November or December as we're trying to wrap up. And so really it's trying to define what activities are going on in the park when, and we have that pretty well defined, and we try and match that. If you punt for a future year, I don't know that this is going to get cheaper in 2020 or 2021. That's not probably a good bet either.
and plus if we go in a future year, and this shouldn't be, you know, the criteria for when we do things, but it is one, is the $196,000 June of this year expires.
Well, and you're going to have some legitimate expenses that you can apply towards
Right,
that grant
right.
funding, but you will not, it will be unlikely that you will be able to use it all up if you punt for a future year.
That's what I mean. You know, if we
Yeah.
delay it, it's gone. If we're going to do it, we better get her done.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? If not, the resolution awarding bids for Minnesota Square Park Pavilion Phase 2. And with the change Todd talked about on 22A. Appears on pages 26 and 27. Is there a motion for approval?
Move the resolution, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Pfeiffer?
Aye.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson?
Nay.
Councilmember Carlin?
Aye.
Mayor Zeman?
Aye.
Councilmember Klum?
Aye.
Resolution passes with one name. Next up, we have, thank you, Eric, appreciate it. Next up, we have the Rivers Edge Hospital and Clinic Alternative Bid Award, and George is here with us tonight.
Mayor, council members, thanks for the opportunity to come and discuss this part of our project. As you see on page 28 of your packet, We have a request for adding an alternate. It's an in-slab snow melting program, piping program. It's the first part, actually the second part of a three-piece process to put in this snow melting system. This particular request is to put the piping in when the slab is poured, which we hope, weather permitting, could be next week. The area to be heated is about 1,600 square feet. It's where cars pull in at the front entrance and the sidewalks going around that half circle under the canopy. You can recall the design of the main entrance. We have freed up, if you will. We have this money available, the $38,540 out of our contingency funds. When that money, if that money is used, our contingency still remains at about 4.2% of remaining construction. The third and final phase of this project, I hope to come before you at a later date, and that's to put the mechanical parts in. That will be the pumps and the heaters. The space is already built, the hookup's already built, the pipe will be in this being approved, the pipe will be in the concrete, and that'll make the system complete. Now, this is a safety issue, as you can easily imagine right now, for controlling ice and snow. It also helps keep the hospital cleaner, not having to sand or salt that front entrance. And just, as I said, safety, just plain eliminating slip hazard at a high volume entry point on our campus. So I'll pause there. Questions?
I agree with you. It's really important because if you've gone any place that's got a canopy over the top of it, when the wind blows and we get snow and it blows in and it turns to ice, it's treacherous trying to walk up to a door.
And I failed to mention this alternate approval has been recommended by both the building committee and the hospital commission for your approval.
Susie?
Was there an estimate on what the second half of this would cost?
Yep. The final phase, all those mechanical pieces, is just under $93,000.
An additional 93?
Yes.
So we're effectively indicating that we will also authorize that future payment.
No, not necessarily. Should that money not become available, should it not be freed up, this system will just wait until we can afford to add those mechanicals at any point.
Okay.
It's just a hookup,
But,
purchase and hookup.
but as it is, this $38,000 purchase on its own would not provide the full snow
Nope,
melting capacity?
it wouldn't, but not to put it in today.
Right,
We would miss
of
that
course.
opportunity, and to go backwards, we would have to tear out all that concrete and redo it.
Sure.
So that's the opportunity that we have.
Oh, absolutely. I understand, and I think it's worthwhile. I just want to make sure we understand the full financial impact.
Yep.
So-
Yeah, it won't be complete, but it's the logical sequence of steps.
And what did you say, just roughly, what would be the square footage?
We'll be,
What was that? 1,600?
1,600 will be heating.
So, okay, thanks.
George, if this would have been $3,541 less, you wouldn't even be here tonight, right? 'Cause
No,
isn't that
that's
30
not true.
Oh, isn't that
All
35,000
alternates.
threshold for this?
No, alternates all come to the
Alternates,
city council.
that's right. Yeah, sorry. That's right. Any other, Steve?
You know, George, I really want to appreciate the commission, hospital commission, for approving this. I have worked in environments where I had two ramps. One side had the heating system in that you're referencing, and the other side did not. And I'll tell you what, before they put the heating side in, I could not get up in the winter because of ice and snow. And people had to push me up. So I'm very aware of these, and I really want to appreciate the commission for moving forward on recommending this.
I think it's I fully support it. Our population and the patients that we serve are increasingly elderly or have mobility challenges. And so to eliminate ice, not totally, but to a great extent, is really important to us. Safety, satisfaction, and a risk possibility also.
Okay. Anyone else? Questions, comments? The resolution awarding alternate bid award for 2018 Rivers Edge Hospital Expansion Project for snow melt at main entrance appears on page 29. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second it.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Grahams,
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin,
Aye.
Mayor Zeman,
Aye.
Councilmember Conley,
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a 2019 farmland lease. And Todd and Jim, maybe?
Actually, I'm going to turn this one over to Jim.
Okay.
This is the triangle that lies south of the Fort Road, across the street from the new high school. Basically, it's about 11 acres that has been used in farming for ever since we bought the property. The individual who has farmed it for this time has approached the city and has requested an opportunity to farm it again. He's willing to leave the rate the same as it was last year and the year before that. Given the commodity prices, I don't think it's appropriate to look at raising rent. There's other farmers in the area. I just think for this amount, it's an appropriate thing. He's done a good job. He's been consistent. He's worked with us when he farmed the entire tract to help us get the school in place. So I would recommend we lease it to him for another year. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
Questions? Thing I want to point out, two things, I guess. The Annexteds are, from their reputation and what I've seen, they're great stewards of the land. So I think they're good there. The other thing is this triangle. I think we're fortunate to get somebody to farm it because most people's equipment you can barely turn around in this thing. So if he
Right.
wants to do this for this amount, I think it's very, very good.
Plus, we also save the cost of maintaining.
Right.
I mean, we would have to make turf, we would have to hire crews
Right.
to mow it, and there's really
Yeah, especially with
just
those.
basically a cost to it. It's
Yeah,
not
with the points on it. If it was a square, it might be a little bit different, but with the triangle like that. Any other questions or comments? Not the resolution authorizing the execution of the one-year lease of Outlet A from Magner Farm appears on page 36. Is there a motion for approval?
Make the motion to approve.
Is there? Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin,
Aye.
Mayor Zeman,
Aye.
Councilmember Conley,
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer,
Aye.
Councilmember Grahams.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. That concludes our new business. Next up, we have reports. I only have one thing for the future. Sunday is St. Patrick's Day, and by golly, there's a parade at 3 o'clock, and I think it's supposed to be 32 degrees maybe. So anyway, just a reminder, 3 o'clock parade starts, and probably activities later if people want to find them. That's all I have.
Mr. Mayor, members, I just have one report, and I'm going to yield the floor to council members Carlin and Kwame and Public Works Director Moulton to discuss or give a little bit of a report on the APPA rally that they attended in Washington. Was it a week and a half ago now, 2 weeks ago? Something like that. Yeah.
End of February.
Yeah, so I don't know if anyone wants to jump in and comment.
I'll start. We attended the conference. We had some opportunities to speak with our legislators as part of the MMUA, Minnesota Municipal Utilities Association. Through that process, we were able to visit with all three of our legislative representatives, Senators Klobuchar and Smith, and also Representative Hagedorn. We also participated in office visits with some of the other representatives in southern Minnesota, recognizing that our issues when it comes to utility management are quite similar to those of our neighbors. And so if we can bolster one another and visit with one another's representatives, we can also spread that word a little bit further about what our needs are and how our needs within a a community with municipally owned utilities are a little bit different from others. That's not something that I think some of the metro communities are as familiar with, and so certainly reaching out to some of those legislators, explaining our needs to them as well, also does us good in the long run. So we had most of those meetings at the Capitol on Wednesday, but we also were meeting with our colleagues through SIMPA and MMUA throughout the week, and doing some good networking with all of those folks as well. So, John?
So I see value in the city sending elected representatives and sending somebody from the utility department. For the professional staff, for Pete Moulton going, I'm sure you can report on the seminars and such he attended, the technical aspects of the convention. What I saw him doing also was interacting with other people from our SIMPA group, not only the other technical people, but also the elected officials and the administrative staff, the city administrators, city managers, which is all a very positive thing. We also had an opportunity to spend time with them, listening to their problems, and going out afterwards for, I didn't know you could sit for 2 hours and talk about nothing but electric utilities. I did not think there was that much to talk about. To sit in a
You
bar.
lie, you've done it in previous
sit,
years.
sit in a bar and drink a beer or a couple of beers and just not talk about anything else. It was remarkable. One other thing I noticed that's changing, MMUA represents almost entirely outstate communities. The elected representatives in Washington now from Minnesota, the 8 representatives and 2 senators, are now 50% female, which is a marked change from the way things used to be. Not only are they half female, not all of them are from of Northern European heritage. MMUA from the rural communities has been for 100 years almost entirely one gender, and they are adapting to the changes. And I've been going now almost 20 years, maybe gone 10 times every couple of years ago. And I noticed the change in MMUA, and there were actually women there now as part of the MMUA contingent this year for the first time. So the world is changing, and MMUA is being dragged along. It is changing also. So there's social aspects to this that I find interesting.
Pete?
We had a lot of fun networking, I think, this year, just talking about the future of the electric industry and where it's going in upcoming years, especially how it'll impact St. Peter and the neighboring SIMPA communities. There's a lot of things happening out there. It's fun to watch the politics in action. A couple of issues that we did get into that were very interesting is electric vehicles and how it'll impact the 169 corridor. A lot of discussion on that, but also working just with the SIMPA staff and the SIMPA board members that were along there in shaping the future is a lot of fun.
I don't know if you have questions for any of the attendees?
I'd like
Steve?
to, oh, go ahead, Steve.
I just have several. First of all, how many would you suspect were there? I mean, in terms of people from different utilities and also elected representatives and or technical staff.
Well, the APPA convention itself is from all over the country. There are probably a couple of thousand people there. From the state of Minnesota, there were probably 50 maybe from MMUA, and maybe 15 or so from SIMPA.
But how many communities does that represent?
I would guess there was probably 20 plus communities there.
So 2 per?
Right, and some commissioners were present, mayors, council members, commission members, utility staff, broad spectrum there.
And then you mentioned, Susan, the technical classes. What types of classes were there available for the non-technical staff?
Oh, I don't think I referenced those, but we've talked about them in the past. In past years, we actually arranged that the council representatives, as well as Pete, or before that Lou, would all be registered for the main conference itself. over the years and in talking with Todd, we really decided that the technical sessions were of limited value for the elected officials because they're talking about things like how to keep your linemen safe up on the poles and how to manage cybersecurity and those sorts of things, which frankly are just way out of my league. And so for several years now, we haven't actually had the elected representatives registered for that portion of the conference, and instead we only participate in I can't remember the title, but MMUA's Day at the Hill, whatever the portion of the event that actually takes place at the Capitol and interacting with the legislators. So we did not participate in any of those sessions because they aren't really geared towards elected officials. They're geared towards technicians.
So there are no non-technical classes at all?
Not in this seminar.
Okay. Can I continue?
But there are things about how to lobby effectively.
Oh, okay.
MMUA talks about
All
what
right.
what kind of messages and what are the key points to those messages. So there's those kind of activities.
Okay,
that go
that's
on.
what I was wondering.
Yeah.
And
I'm
then-
sorry.
And then, how do you make a contact with our area senators and/or representatives?
Well, I think that's part of the benefit of being part of this coalition. The staff for MMUA or SIMPA or some combination of those two agencies actually do all of those arrangements for us. So
And they employ a professional lobbyist in Washington.
yes, so there is a lobbyist who is working on behalf of our municipal utility issues.
Who is probably the smartest guy in the world.
He
As
is
I can
very
tell.
amazing to listen to. He has a very clear knowledge of everything, I guess, at a broad 30,000 level that's going on in DC on that given day. And he's really good at helping to frame how those national issues will alter the lens that your elected officials are looking through when you go in on any given day to go talk to them. What's in the back of their minds when it comes to budgets and elections, and what are their pressures. So it's really beneficial to go to that first session with him so that he can help us frame our petitions, I guess, to those legislators as effectively as possible. Yeah, so when we arrive, we are presented with a schedule that has a list of the legislators' names, the room numbers where we'll be meeting with them, the names of staff, if their staff will be present, and the time and the date that you need to be there. So you go from room to room, and it's all been arranged in advance, which is really actually not an easy task, right? Especially when we're trying to hit all of those elected representatives and trying not to overlap to make sure that people can get from one room to a next and a couple buildings away in some cases. So we're very fortunate that someone else does that legwork, and Pete and Angie don't have to do that for us.
We're used to.
Yes.
Can I have one more question?
You can
sir?
have all you want, Steve.
Just one final question. Do you feel, do you get lost in all these people? Do you feel like you're just kind of, lost, like a grain of sand on a large ocean beach?
Would you be asking about all the people who visit the Capitol on a daily basis, or do you mean within our MMUA contingent that's visiting?
Just the whole environment that you're in. You know what I'm saying? I'm not, I'm just wondering, do you feel like you're lost? And,
Yeah, the whole place is an anthill.
That's what I
It
mean.
is.
yeah.
There are
Well,
people
I would say-
there are people in a rush because there are people doing important things, and there's everybody going every direction at once, and they're all important.
I would say a few of the things, I'm sorry, John, not to cut you off. In many cases, we're meeting with the staffers, these legislative staffers. They have a number of staff in each office, and those staff usually have specialties. So somebody maybe is a specialist in energy policy or the environment or something along those lines. And so by meeting with that particular specialist, we're able to tune our message a little bit more, and it means that they're more familiar with those issues than a generalist would be. Also, over the past couple of years, at least in the years that I've attended, recently, when MMUA makes those arrangements for our group to go speak with the senators or the representatives, they've been very considerate in giving our St. Peter contingent some of the speaking roles. And so it's one thing to sit in the audience or in the background and nod your head along with the 20 other people in the room who all share those issues, but to be able to be one of the ones speaking maybe elevates our status just a little bit.
I'm sorry, I just thought of another
One more,
question.
Steve.
When you use the acronym MMUA, are you saying Minnesota Municipal Utilities Association?
That's correct.
Okay, you're not talking about a global U.S. contingent, you're talking about the Minnesota, okay, all right. That narrows it down then considerably.
And they do lobbying for
Okay.
the utility companies, water, wastewater, electric on the state and federal level.
But in the state of Minnesota, there are 123 communities that have their own municipal utilities,
Right.
and they mention that a lot.
Well, I read the newspaper that comes every month, and I find it interesting. So, I mean, that's why I learn a lot of things through that publication, yeah.
And I think one other thing to note is that, so the national conference is APPA, the American Public Power Association. And so people are there from all 50 states. Within that group, the Minnesota contingent gets together and we make sure to visit all of our Minnesota legislators. However, I would imagine that other folks from APPA are doing the same from Wisconsin, Texas, California, Maryland. And so across all of the Capitol buildings over the days of our conference, you have municipal utility people representing municipal utilities going to their individual senators and legislators, all with making similar requests to hopefully all 100 and 500 and some, so that everybody's hearing about this information at the same time. So that's part of the power, again, is that we were visiting our Minnesota representatives, but all of those folks from the other 49 states were visiting theirs simultaneously.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms.
So,
Garland?
so if 20, you said there's about 25 cities represented? John was saying there's 123. What happens to this other 80%? That aren't represented?
They can participate if they choose
No,
to.
I mean, but how do the actions taken because we go? How do the actions differ than people that don't go, that don't appear, for all of you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Really, the MMUA represents the group as a whole.
Right.
And so we meet earlier in February and decide on the issues that we want to discuss out there, things that we're doing at home here and how we want to represent that. And so all of them are represented that are members of MMUA.
Right. Whether they show up there or not, they're going to
That's
get
correct.
the same results.
That's correct.
Whatever.
I will say, though, that our experience has been, and I don't want to speak for some of you that have been there, there are more localized issues that don't have anything to do with utilities that are discussed with our
You're right.
representatives in Washington.
I
And
was-
there's
I was-
definite value in that.
Yeah, I was there last year.
Yeah.
I think, too, it's worth noting that somebody has to do that legwork, and so it might be tempting to say we could skip out and let somebody else carry that weight, but ultimately, it's beneficial for representatives from those communities to be out there, and if it's not us, then who are we sending in our stead, and what kind of job are they going to do?
No, I understand that, but I guess the point I'm getting at is, I would imagine the 20 or 25 cities that were represented there this year, I would imagine we're about the same ones that were represented there last year
Yeah,
and
probably
the year
about-
before.
Quite a few. They're seeing the value and following through.
But the value, what I'm getting at, the value that they receive is no different than the value of those that don't attend.
Right.
Okay.
It's a little bit like fair share union members. There are some who are doing the legwork, and others are benefiting from
Yep.
their effort.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, one more.
Sure.
I just want to thank the people that went. I mean, I would really like to go, but based on the number of people and the speed that John Kavami has alluded to, exclude me, because I'd get run over in the crowd.
No.
I remember you being out there.
Pardon me?
I remember you being out in Washington.
No, I've never been to
No.
Washington.
But no, Steve, you would, I was there last year, you would have no problem.
Who was that?
Okay.
You would have no problem.
And I just want to note that for at least the last 2 years, and maybe more years back, the National Conference on Rare Diseases has been taking place at the same time as ours. And so while we've been wandering around the Capitol buildings, there have been people, it's interesting because the same people are wearing the same matching t-shirts everywhere you go. And so actually there have been quite a few representatives from that organization with mobility impairments moving around at the same time. So certainly it would be doable, and if you're interested, I would encourage you to think about it. It's exhausting, but I think it would be a really great experience too.
Anything else, Todd?
Mr. Mayor, the only other thing that I have isn't a report, but it's really a request for action and passing a resolution that's on page 37 of the closed session under Minnesota Statute 13D.05. This is to develop and consider offers and counteroffers on the purchase of real estate. We continue to negotiate on parcels related to the firewall. And so I'm looking for a closed session. I would anticipate that you would come back into session only to adjourn the meeting. I don't have additional action planned for you at this point.
All right. Before I ask for that motion, does anybody else have anything else to add? Steve?
Mr. Mayor, Jerry and I were wondering if you're Irish and if you were going to lead the parade on Sunday.
I will not lead the parade. I think we're about the 4th or 5th float.
So,
Pulling a wagon.
So, oh, you're pulling the wagon, a big wagon?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Loggers was very gracious to offer a convertible or a pickup truck.
Okay.
This one's only 4 blocks, so we
So-
usually walk. And I am not Irish. Of course,
Okay,
I haven't done a DNA.
Okay.
So, and my wife's maiden name was her mother's maiden name was Conroy, and her dad swears they were part Irish, and she had one done, and there is no Irish at all. None. So they're just aghast while that happened.
Everybody's Irish.
For one day, we'll all be Irish. Other than that, anybody else have anything else to add? If not, the resolution calling for a closed session for the purpose of potential land sale or potential land purchase or sale appears on page 37. Is there a motion for approval?
Make a motion to approve.
So moved.
Is there a second? Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please, Bart.
Councilmember Carlin?
Aye.
Mayor Zeman?
Aye.
Member Conley?
Aye.
Member Pfeiffer?
Aye.
Member Graham?
Aye.
Member Johnson?
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Once again, before we recess, we are going to the Nicollet Room this time downstairs, and we will not be coming back here for any reason, so we will recess to that. Thank you.